Okay.
Whoever's on the phone has to put it on mute.
Okay. This is mute. No?
You don't want to mute, they will hear you.
They have to
mute.
if I'm muting, that would be terrible. Okay. I think this is good. So it gets better sound from closer. Okay, welcome everyone. This is a combo. We're doing a combo, right, Levi? We're doing a share. I get paid double. We're doing a share and we're doing a fabrengen all in one. This is a continuation of last week's share. Yet, hopefully it's going to be understandable to everyone. Listen at your own risk, because this is intense stuff that we're talking about. And this is, the exposure to this information might create a lot of internal strife and struggle, and but it's good. It's good stuff. Very good stuff. Okay, so today is L'chaim, everyone. Today is the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, fifth Chabad Rebbe. I'm explaining a little for my audience over here. I might be a little bit more explaining because I have an online audience that's listening as well, and not everybody's familiar. So you please forgive me for being a little bit more expressive and explaining things that might not need an explanation to everyone. I have here a bunch of booklets. This is from last week. We learn here. I just would like to invite everyone. We have a class on Moshiach every Tuesday night, and there's I guarantee you, this is the best class in the city. That's my opinion. I agree. All time. And it's a geschmacka class, a good class. I'm putting in a little bit of effort in preparing them. So, and it's Baruch Hashem coming along really geschmack and very special. We're learning good stuff, and we're exploring certain areas that are generally not so explored. So, from the whole Mashiach series that we're going to learn, this is probably the most intense stuff. I was hoping I would have maybe 4 people over here, not such a big crowd for such exposure. But the Eibishter wanted differently. He made it happen like this. The Rebbe in Parshas Vayera, Tavshin Nun Beis. Last week we mentioned the Rebbe in Parshas Vayera, Tavshin Nun Beis, said some pretty extreme stuff. And if anybody thought that it was a fluke, that for some reason in Parshas Vayera it was said, but then it was like chas v'shalom, a slip of the tongue by a Rebbe. First of all, those in Yanam are not shayach, because you're dealing with Shechina medaberes metoch groinoi. The Shechina speaks from the Gorein. I saw yesterday something really, really phenomenal in Biyudei Hazoyar. It has nothing to do with officially this class. I wasn't preparing this class. It's related to a class I gave last night. In Biyudei Hazoyar from the Alter Rebbe, or from the Mittler Rebbe, really, which is really the Alter Rebbe, but it's the Mittler Rebbe Sefer, Biyudei Hazoyar, and the Alter Rebbe is my modern that the Mittler Rebbe wrote. The Mittler Rebbe is talking about Kol Asher Toimel Chasara Shma B'Koila, that the Eibishter tells Avram Avinu, whatever Sarah tells you, you should listen. And Rashi brings that that Avram was a tefela. Avram was tafel. He was secondary to Sarah b'Nevius. In prophecy, Avram was secondary to Sarah. So the Rebbe is asking, the Alter Rebbe is asking, Sarah is really, the very notion of husband and a wife is that the husband is mashpia and the woman is makabel. The mashpia, by the very definition of the relationship, the mashpia is always higher than the makabel. If the mashpia, meaning the influencer, is higher than the influenced. If the mashpia is not higher than the makabel, then he's not the mashpia. He has nothing to be mashpia to the makabel. So if Sarah is higher than Avram, so I'm sorry, if Avram is higher than Sarah because he's the mashpia, how do we say that Sarah is bigger than him in Nevi'us? So you have to say, the Alter Rebbe says it's only in Nevi'us. It's not in anything else. In other words, in terms of quality of soul and so on and so forth, the Avram Avinu was higher than Sarah. But when it came particularly to Ruach HaKodesh, to the holy words, to Ruach HaKodesh, to what you call the spirit of prophecy that's on the tongue, that inyan was stronger by Sarah. And the Alter Rebbe explains a very interesting idea, because he says Ruach HaKodesh, doesn't say Nevuah, but he says Ruach HaKodesh is shaykh primarily to Alma de Isgalia. That means, because Ruach HaKodesh comes from Malchus. What's Ruach HaKodesh? Is the Eibishter, your words are God's words. Hashem is communicating through you in terms of Dafka, the Dibor. Ruach HaKodesh means you say things, and what you're saying is divinely, is a channel for divinity, like the Eibishter is speaking. So the Art Tzadikim, he says, that are very, very deep and very, very high. They're Merkava, they're chariots to very high levels. But they are mainly, their godliness is from the private side of the Eibishter. If we would say it like this, they facilitate the private inward world of God, of Hashem. And because they represent, or they include, or they're tapped into the inner element, so they can be very powerful and incredible attachment and dveikus and so on to the Eibishter, but they don't have necessarily the mouth to communicate it. And therefore, they're not as powerful when it comes to Ruach HaKodesh. But those who are a Merkava, like Sada, he says. Sada's a Merkava, her name is Sada. Sada's a Merkava, she's a vehicle, she's a chariot to Malchus. Malchus peh, Malchus is the mouth. The whole Inyan of Malchus is to bring lidei gilui, to bring to revelation everything that there is in the higher Olamais. That's the whole Inyan of Malchus. Divine communication to the world. Since that's the Inyan of Malchus, Sada, in that particular Inyan of speech, she says higher things. And that's why Hidalta brings an interesting thing, that the word tzaddikim, there were much greater tzaddikim, but yet you don't find by them so much the Inyan of Ruach HaKodesh. And you have others that they were like, they're like prophets, and they weren't on such high levels. I don't know exactly which tzaddikim what, but this Alter Rebbe says. He says, because those neshamis weren't shaykh so much to Alma de Isgalia. They weren't so much about revealing secrets down here. Now this is, so if we take this concept, and we as Lubavitch Chassidim know that we have 7 Rabbeim, and the 7 Rabbeim correspond to the 7 emotions, and the 7th one corresponds to Sfiras HaMalchus, and Malchus is Dibur. So our Rebbe, more than all the other Rabbeim, his speech is purely divine. It's purely divine. There's no shaila about it. Huh?
He's a cousin.
Ich sehe nicht.
Moshiach.
Oh, Shalom Aleichem. There you go. Welcome. That's good. Yeah. According, that's all good. That's incredible. Yeah. Shkoyach. Kroivim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakal. So the Rebbe's speech is definitely, and you see, Taka, one of the things about that is, one of the things that strikingly differentiate the Rebbe from all the previous Rabbeim is simply the amount of time that the Rebbe spent with the Chassidim. You can't even compare it. There's no, the Friediger Rebbeim, they fabrengt a few times a year. Very little, you just Kislev, put him, look in Torah Shalom. How many fabrengs do you have from the Rebbeim? How many the Rebbe Rashab came out and fabreng? On Yom Tovim here and there, and Agam the Pagra, not. And the Rebbe announced hours and hours and hours. And because the Rebbe is Alma Galia, he's bringing everything. The Rebbe is not keeping. The Rebbe also would say many times, the Friediger Rebbe knew that I can't keep secrets. If he told it to me, I'm going to spill the beans. So the Rebbe speaks. And therefore, we can't say chas v'sholom, even in the slightest way that there is a plitas peh from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said something that is not fully emes v'yatzev v'nochim v'kayim v'yoshav v'nemo v'nechmad, whatever, the whole thing. It's absolutely emes on every level. So in this Sikha, Pashas Vayera, as I mentioned last week, the Rebbe drops a powerful bomb. He repeats it in other words the following week in Parshas Chayesara, and he continues in Parshas Tolos, 3 weeks. The idea that the Rebbe conveys in those 3 Sikhas consecutively, one after another, is that we are holding not only, the Rebbe said these words, look in the first page of the booklet, the Rebbe says, not only do we have in our days the Metzias of Mashiach, the existence of Mashiach, but we also have V'kim sheken yeshne lo rak ha-Metzias to Mashiach, ela gam ha-hizgalus to Mashiach. Today's days we also have the revelation of Mashiach. V'achshav, so what's now? That has happened already. We had already the hizgalus of Mashiach. V'achshav, and now tzrichim rak lekabel pnei Mashiach tzidkeinu b'poel mamish. We have to just go to and greet him. But on his terms, on his end, he revealed himself already. Powerful words. Now, in the next page, I made a copy, and I bavoted this last week. This is Tefet Var Malchus is one that. I'm not exactly. This is the Muga. This is the Muga Digasich. Yeah, it's just in Lashon Kodesh and with Nekudas. The following week in Parshas Chayesara, the Rebbe repeats a very powerful statement again about where we are standing today, and that's on page 65 that you have over here, the second page in the handout. The Rebbe says that since in the second to the last paragraph, that that in every generation there's someone who's born to be Moshiach, someone who is worthy because of his righteousness to be Moshiach. And now, since the Rebbe, he's referring to the Frierdiker Rebbe, which we discussed many times. When the Rebbe refers to the Frierdiker Rebbe as Nasi Hador, he's referring to himself, per his own admission to the lawyers, and obviously. And the Rebbe refers to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Nasi Darenu, the Nasi of our generation, the Shliach HaYachid Shebedarenu, the only Shliach. Why is he saying the only Shliach? I mean, the Rebbe started a networking of Shluchim. What do you mean the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe is on? That means the only primary Shliach, and we are all his Shluchim. So all the Kol HaNachalim Hoilchem Elayam, all the rivers go to one big sea, and the sea is the Nahar Yotzei Me'edan and Masham. From there, it splits into all Shlicha Shaladim Kamoisa. It's all, but it's really only one Shliach. And in this Sikha particularly, that's why the Rebbe is emphasizing Shliach, because in this Sikha, this was by the Kinnis HaShluchim, which, by the way, this is an unbelievable thing that's happening this year, that the Kinnis HaShluchim is, the theme of the Kinnis HaShluchim is this Sikha, to relearn the Sikha and to delve in it, and how the Rebbe like upgraded shlichus to be focused, laser focused on one inyan, and that is to bring about the final, not even his galus, to bring that we should come lekabel pnei Mashiach tzedkenu, that the world, because the Rebbe can't say to bring about bias on Mashiach, he can't even say to bring about his galus on Mashiach, because the Rebbe said the week before that happened already. So the Rebbe is saying to bring about that which everybody should be ready, lekabel pnei Mashiach, because that's what he said the week before, that is left to do. Achshav, the only thing that's left to do is lekabel pnei Mashiach, to go greet Mashiach. So the Rebbe therefore is so in that talk, the Rebbe is talking to the shluchim. So the Rebbe is saying that every shlichus that there is, every yid is really a shliach, but it really all goes back to one primary shlichus that started with the shlichus of Eliezer. He starts the shlichus of unifying heaven and earth, which is really and then becomes the shlichus of Moshe Rabbeinu to take out the Yidden. And finally, Moshe Rabbeinu hands the baton over to the final Mishaleach. He says to the Eibush, the Shlach no b'yatishlach, send it by the grand Shliach who is Mashiach Tzidkenu. So it's really one string of shlichus. And so the Rebbe is saying that the Rebbe, referring to himself, he's the Shliach HaYachid. He's the only divine messenger in our generation who on this, at least in this capacity of shlichus, it's his shliach. It's a very strong word, Shliach HaYachid, exclusive. And he says, and then he adds more, V'hamashiach HaYachid shebedarenu, and the only Mashiach in our generation. In other words, if in 1991 and 1992, we know what the Chassam Sofer says, that in every generation there is someone who is worthy to be Mashiach. And as I spoke last week, this Mashiach is on standby. Literally, there has to be someone on standby. Just in case we need to send Mashiach, someone has to be ready. So if there was any possibility for anybody to believe, at least in 1991 and 1992, when the Rebbe is saying this Sikha, that there might be some other faith tzaddik somewhere, that this is the one who's on standby, the Rebbe, and this Sikha says that, HaMashiach HaYachid shebedarenu, fartik. That's it. Now, so what did the Rebbe notify? Based on the notification that came from the only Shliach, so obviously if he's the only Shliach and he's the only Mashiach, so he's the one who's probably the only one who can update us about these inyanim. In other words, it doesn't make a difference what Chatzkel Bronstein says and what Moshe Finkelstein says and what Rabbi so-and-so says. He might be the head of the OU or the head of the Rabbinic Council. And you want to hear from an update on Mashiach, you got to hear from the one who was appointed for this inyan, the Shliach HaYachid, the Mashiach HaYachid. So the Rebbe says, let me tell you what the update is. What's the update? Shekvar Simon was calling Yonim. Altzes Fartik. We finished everything. Had a movement, so it's understood that right now, right now it's starting to be fulfilled, this idea. What's being fulfilled? Let these words sink in. Just simple pshat. Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter, don't send me Moshe, send Moshiach. That was the word shlach no b'yad tishlach. The Eibishter didn't accept it, and the Eibishter said, yeah, I'm going to send Moshiach, but right now I'm sending you. The Rebbe, however, explains that the Eibishter did not deny Moshe. Moshe and Mashiach are one Indian. It's really one shlichus. It's one shlichus that spans all of Jewish history. It starts with Moshe, and Mashiach is kind of like the conclusion of it, especially according to this, that we know that Moshe and Mashiach is one Hashem. Leheir, just an exciting idea that excites me. Maybe it doesn't excite you, but Leheir, it excites me that when Moshe Rabbeinu finished his shlichus, what was Moshe Rabbeinu's age? Completed his shlichus ba'olam hazeh, 120. And so this year is the Rebbe's 120th birthday. So in a sense, we can say, again, I'm just get excited about all these cool stuff. I know some people keep their cool all the time. These things don't excite them, but I do. That obviously, if Moshe Rabbeinu continues, he continues from 120. That's when he moves on to the next phase of shlichus. It's just an interesting idea. This Yud Aleph Nisan. Dafka when? During Corona. And during this cuckoo world that we've never seen, that's spinning out of control, and no one knows where they're coming or going. And it happens to be that this year Pesach has already been Matzah Shemitah. I think it's been Matzah Shemitah. This year is Shemitah. So we're moving in. Pesach is already for sure already the beginning of the phase of Matzah Shemitah. Okay, which we know is the most opportune time for Geula and so on and so forth. Just Lahoyen. Who am I saying this? I'm saying this to the Eibishter. I'm saying if it's a nice time, you can do it earlier. No one will mind if we get things rolling on Chav Cheshvan. But if Chas v'Shalom, we're looking for a good time, this Yud Aleph Nisan is a very amazing time. In any case, back to what we're saying. So the Rebbe said it's beginning to be fulfilled, the Shlach Na B'Yad Tishlach. What does that mean? That the Eibishter is now sending who? Mashiach Tzidkenu. And the Rebbe spells it out. Hashlichus shel kvoid kedushas Mordechai Admor, which is his shlichus. The shlichus of Mashiach is the shlichus of the Rebbe. So from this it's understood. The only thing that's left over in our avodas hashlichus, hu lekabel pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu bepoyol mamish. So now we have to go receive him bepoyol, because the shlichus started already. Now he needs an audience. But why does Mashiach need that? Can't we just like kind of ignore the whole situation? That would be a good question. Why can't we just ignore the situation and continue doing our thing? And when he's ready to call us, he'll call us. Vasim and it's his job. So the Rebbe says, no. In order for who? The one that he said is Moshiach HaYachid Shebedor. The one that he said that is what? HaShliach HaYachid. The one who has already begun the Shlach No B'Yad Tishlach. In other words, it started already. In order for him to be able to complete it and bring about the total Geula, he can use some help. What's the help? So that the help is that the avoid of the shluchim, and the Rebbe, by the way, in the Sikha, the Rebbe says it's not only shluchim, it's definitely all chassidim, and it's all yidden. That's our avodah right now, to help complete this shlichus. Okay, so what do you see from here? Same idea that the Rebbe says in the week before, that we're holding already after his galus of Mashiach. See? Here but a little different. There he says we're holding after the revelation of Mashiach. Here he says we're definitely holding in the time that the shlichus has begun. Why the difference? Why in Parshas Vayeda is the Rebbe referring to it as a bepashtus, just bepashtus, no big Kabbalistic insights over here. Why in Parshas Vayeda is he referring to it as the hisgalus has happened already? And over here he's using the term, the shlichus begun already. The shlichus to bepoil mamish, be redeemed the Jewish people, started already. It's very simple. Parshas Vayeda, the whole teichen of the Sikha is Vayeda Elav Hashem, the hisgalus, the revelation. It's all about godly revelation. So in the context of godly revelation, what does he speak about? How we've reached already the point that Mashiach is hisgalus. The next week, where the whole teichen of the Sikha is Moshiach, not the hisgalus of Mashiach, but Mashiach's shlichus, and the Rebbe is talking and charging the shluchim with the shlichus. So there, when he turns it into the final stage of the Sikha, So in what context is he talking about Mashiach? In the context of the shlichus. And he's saying that the shlichus to actually take the Yidden out of Gola started already. And now he's calling the shluchim to participate in this and to ease things up by what? By helping the people come to Mashiach. That's it's up to them. Okay. What? Which is the shlichus of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah. Yeah. Now, in the following week, the week Parshas told us, the Rebbe repeats it a third time. There's 3 weeks. There the Rebbe is talking about how the chiddush of this state that we're in right now is much bigger than anything that's ever going to happen in the future. In other words, the awesome moment when Mek'arbe Kanfei Sa'aretz, every Jew will be picked up and fly on the clouds, Al Kanfei Nesharim, on eagle's wings or on clouds to Eretz Yisrael, and the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi is revealed and comes down, and the Mashiach is here, and we have everything, is not as big of a chidush as the Iker Inyan. The Iker Inyan of Bias Mashiach is the moment when Mashiach's neshama is revealed in this world. And in the words of the last sikh of Parshas Toldos, the Rebbe differentiates between Ruchai Shel Mashiach and Oiroi Shel Mashiach. Ruchai Shel Mashiach means, or the words of the Rebbe is, Ruchai Shel Mashiach and Oiroi Shel Mashiach. Ruchai Shel Mashiach means a spirit that's in him. Like it says by Shimshon HaGibor. Vatochel, it started to the lifoim, the lashon of vatipoim. It started to his heartbeat. It started to beat inside of him. Ruach Elokim, something like that is a lashon by Shimshon HaGibor. In other words, he became a different person. And so it says by Shaul HaNavi. Once they anointed Shaul HaNavi as a melech and they put the Shem in HaMishcha, he became another man. He suddenly felt in a whole imbuing of energy and life and kingship and so on and so forth. So the Rebbe says the Iker Chiddush of Mashiach is when that's called when the Ruchai Shel Mashiach manifests in Mashiach. It's called the Ruchai. That's the Etzem of Mashiach. When that comes lidei Giloi, when that's activated, that's the highest thing. After that, there is the next thing called Oiroi Shel Mashiach. Once there is a Ruchai Shel Mashiach, which means in him is the spirit of Mashiach, then he begins to influence. You can't influence until you are. Who you are and what you are, then you can influence. So you first have to have it, and then you can shine it. In other words, as I mentioned last week, it's the difference of Ma'or and Or. You first need to have the Ma'or. In order for it to have light, you need to have a light source. So in order to have the rays of Mashiach cross the planet, you need to have the essence of Mashiach first. That's the source of those lights. Okay? Okay. So the Rebbe says the Iker Chiddush is when the Ruchai Shel Mashiach kicks in. Let me read it to you inside. Valpizah moving. She'Iker HaChiddush the Bias HaMashiach. The main Chiddush of Bias HaMashiach, who be his Galus Mitziasai, is when Mashiach's existence, his Mitzias as, look what he says, Matzasi David Avdi. Oh, and I'm going to go back. Let me go back one paragraph before. This is page 87, the third page on the Parshas Toldos, the third page in the handout. The right column, second paragraph. So the Rebbe says, "Sha'avish ruchei shel Mashiach u'lamayla gama oidei shel Mashiach." The avir of Mashiach is higher than the light of Mashiach. Ki or shel Mashiach moida alehi his galus to Mashiach al yedei pu'uloisav. Mashiach does really, really cool stuff, and the whole world recognizes it. You know, Mashiach does like really miracles and so on and so forth. No, the Rebbe says he doesn't do miracles, but Yelachem Melchames Hashem, all the stuff that are listed in the Rambam. That's pu'ulasai. That's his pu'ula. That's not who he is. Ma'ashe ein kein avir shel Mashiach, the ear of Mashiach, which is the idea of ruchai shel Mashiach, moira ala etzem chayas to Mashiach. It refers to his life, that his heartbeat is Mashiach. Koloimar, his galus mitziasai, that Mashiach is revealed. Where to? We're going to soon see. What kind of revelation is that? If he's not yet being revealed to the whole world, what kind of revelation is that? But there is a revelation. It's a Hisgalus, which on this thing the Rebbe said happened already. The Hisgalus of Mitziyasai, the Rebbe said happened 2 weeks before this. The Rebbe said it happened. And but what do you mean? Is it a new person born? That's what it means? No, it's a person that we know already. The Rebbe says. In other words, someone mitzvah. In order that we have a very clear what the Rebbe means, the Rebbe himself spells it out. Mitzvah shekayem is gam lifnei zeh malchus. There is someone who is a melech in a sense, someone who is already standing and has already someone who has already a royal status before. But now, what happened now over what was there before? Is now his galus mitziyasai bitur melech HaMashiach. And now he's revealed as melech HaMashiach. Powerful words. And after the galus of the mitziyas comes here. And the Rebbe says in the next piece, that's understood that the biggest chiddush of his galus mitziyasai mitzasi David Avdi is the ikar chiddush the bias HaMashiach, is that when that happens. Because everything else, kikol protei anyanim shala achrei everything that will follow, bon kitaitza, are all a outcome. These are just ramifications of the essence of Mashiach revealed. They're included in it. Okay. Just like the Rebbe goes on in the Sikh and explains earlier that the moment the moon is revealed, from no moon to a new moon, for example, the moment it's Rosh Chodesh Kislev, we have already the potential of the entire Kislev B'koyach. B'poyel, we don't have it yet. But in Rosh Chodesh Kislev, you have already Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev, the Mitler Rebbe's Chag HaGiyula. And in Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the moment it's Kislev, you have already Yudalit Kislev, the Rebbe's anniversary. You have Chanukah, you have Yutes Kislev. They're all there. They just have to evolve. The main Chiddush is when you go from no to yeah. The moilad, the birth. So the Rebbe says the birth of Mashiach in this world is the biggest chiddush in Bias HaMashiach. So in other words, is it wrong according to this to say that Bias HaMashiach happened already? And I'm not looking over here from an emotional, place where people have like reactions just because they like or they don't like. We have to get over that. It's 30 years of all that Narishkeit, being just honest people looking at this. In other words, would it be a wrong statement if someone said, people say, now, obviously, the Rebbe is not saying that Bias HaMashiach in its totality happened, because the Rebbe just said that Ikir HaChiddush the Bias HaMashiach. The main novelty is the first second. The Bias HaMashiach is not enough to have just the Moilad. The Bias HaMashiach needs the Moilad, the birth, and its full involvement. So it depends what a person means and what context you're saying it. If you're saying, Mashiach happened already, so all's good, then we're okay, we can all go to sleep, all's is fine, then you're a little bit the Meshugana. Then it's not. But if you're really looking in a very deep level about the Bias HaMashiach, that means that Mashiach has arrived, his neshama arrived in an open, manifest way in this world, and that has been activated already, based on what the Rebbe says in the Sichos. And that's what I think we as Hasidim go by. It would be a true statement. Okay, these are the because that Metzias of Mashiach did not affect yet the complete Shlach Nabiyat Tishlach. He only started the Shlach Maschil Hiskayim. But then there is a whole kiyum of it that he has to get around the entire world and get all the Jews back and bring about the entire Geula. And it's not completed until we have a Beis Hamikdash standing and that's schlepping more than enough. Okay, let's
fine, but Misha was there. It was the Gael, then it got worse.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that works. Now, okay. So these were the three sichos that I mentioned last week. Last week I brought to your attention the idea that how can you define his galus HaMashiach, but yet Mashiach but it's not revealed to the world. What's the idea of that is galus? What's the context of an is galus? His galus means revelation. If it's not revealed, who is he revealed to? So last week I brought to you, and you can look it up again in the pamphlet. I made a copy of it. You go to the next page. I brought you the Chassam Sofer, where the Chassam Sofer spells it out very clearly. The Chassam Sofer says in very clear words. I'm not going to read it inside now because I don't want to do a repeat on the whole share that we did last week. But if you take a look at the Chassam Sofer over here, it's a Tshuva Chassam Sofer. Sofer is a very serious authority in halacha. The Chassam Sofer says, I have to let you know something very, very important, that when it comes to Moshiach, you have to realize that Moshiach is a tzaddik, that's a normal human being that lives in this world. And there has to be, and there always has to be somebody like that. Someone has to be, from when the Beis English was destroyed, there has to always be someone who is worthy to be Mashiach if God is ready to appoint it. That's what the Chassam Sofer says. Potentially. There cannot be a world without a potential Mashiach. Because if at that moment you didn't do tshuva, the Rambam says what? If you didn't do tshuva, miyad hen go. And we also know that tshuva doesn't take a long time. Tshuva, as the Zohar says, b'shaytecha de berigecha. That's 1 second. So if you didn't do tshuva, the Rambam says miyad. The Rebbe emphasizes miyad means instantly. So there has to be someone there on standby. If Mashiach is ready to come, the Eibishter can snap his fingers and Mashiach would snap into action. How will that happen? How will that happen? Hold on. Chavre, listen. How will that happen? It will happen as follows. The Eibishter will then communicate with that potential Mashiach, so says the Chassam Sofer, and tell him that he is, just like the Eibishter said to Moshe Rabbeinu when Moshe was 80 years old. So the Eibishter will then tell him. But it's not just that the Eibishter will give him a mission. The Eibishter will also upgrade him to a whole higher level of consciousness. Yeah. The Eibishter will also upgrade him. The Eibishter will also upgrade him to a whole higher level of being. And that's because the Ruach of Mashiach that's in Gan Eden will be downloaded into him. But the Chassam Sofer says, sadly, many of those potential Mashiachs came and went and the Geula didn't come. He says, because of our great sins, we had so many potentials, so many seeds that never germinated and never grew out into the Mashiach tree. So this is the Chassam Sofer. Okay? So what you have over here from the Chassam Sofer is, now, does the Chassam Sofer say, hold on, okay, so the Chassam Sofer leaves it by that. The Chassam Sofer leaves it that the process of Mashiach is that you have a person who suddenly becomes aware because of a divine communication that he's Mashiach. Okay? So that's already in his galus. Why is that in his galus? Why is that called in his galus? Because even though it's not necessarily revealed to the entire world, for example, how long did it take Moshe Rabbeinu to get from the sneh? How long did it take Moshe Rabbeinu to get from the sneh down to Mitzrayim? Took him a while. He had to go back to, he said, I'm going back to Midian, I'm going to speak to his shver, get permission, make Atoris Nedarim. And then he had then his wife gave birth, and then he went out, whatever. There was a shtickle shit. It took him a while until he got there. I think it says a few months. I'm not exactly sure how long it took from when Moshe Rabbeinu was sent until he actually got to Mitzrayim. During that entire time, no one knew about it. There's only one person who knew. Aaron HaKohen got a nevuah from Hashem that to go out towards Moshe. And I don't even know if the Eibishter told Aaron everything about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was chosen to be the Navi. It seems like, yeah, because he said, he'll be happy that you were given that Inyan. Because Moshe. So Aaron knew. No one else knows. So was there in his galus? Was the greatest his galus? The Eibishter appointed Mashiach. And he gave him all the kaiches. How do you know he gave him? He said, I will be with your mouth. I will be with you. It's not you're going. I'm going with you. And I'm going in you, through you, to fulfill the shlichus. Stronger words. Yeah. I don't want to get into that till we finish the Ganze Sugya. Then comes the Sefer HaGilgulim. This Inyan is this is one place it's stated. It's stated in a few different svarim. I found it in 3 svarim, almost word for word. One is in Sefer HaGilgulim, the other one is in Meir Shekel Kesef, which is a Sefer from the Chaim Vital. It's part of the Kizvei Arizal. If you see the Kizvei Arizal set, the red ones or the white ones. Yeah. Okay, it's a connection. So the Arba Meir Shekel Kesef is the name of a Sefer. And over there, he brings exactly the same quote. And it's also, I saw it in Sefer Oid Hachama, which is a Sefer of a Pirush on Zoyar, in Parsha Shemois. Word for word, verbatim. So what does it say over there? Over there it says, same, the Arizal, quoting the Arizal or Reb Chaim Vital, Now what? That in the time of Mashiach, and Mashiach will be a tzaddik born by a ish ve'isha. Take a look. He will, and that is, and when the time comes, the neshama of Mashiach will be downloaded into him. And at that time, but here, what is the chiddush that he adds that is not explicitly stated in the Chasam Sofer? What he adds over here, the Arizal, is the Arizal says that after he becomes aware that he is Mashiach, there is an Izgalus. In other words, he goes from potential Mashiach and he becomes activated in him that he's Mashiach. He says befeidish that he recognizes it, but v'shara noshim loy makirin. So it's a very important idea. He knows, but it's not public information. And it makes sense. Why would everybody know the first second? It's not like suddenly, boom, his light, he lights up and he's like the sun and the whole world sees that light. Not necessarily. He's then given. And he said, that's the Seder. Yetoisef by Koyach Nevuah, he becomes a spectacular Navi, far more than what he was before. It's like he wakes up from sleep. And then he says, "V'oz yakir ba'atzmai ki hu Mashiach, ma shelo haya makir mitchila ma'atzmai." That which he didn't know on the beginning, he didn't know. Now he knows. And then v'ato yizgala achshar b'nei adam lo yakiruhu. Others won't recognize. What do we see from all of this? When we take faith, when the Rebbe says these words, that there was his galus hamashiach already, does that mean his galus for the whole world? The faith is not, because the Rebbe the next week says, and that's the job of the shluchim, to actually go prepare the entire world, that everybody should be ready to be Makabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. So everybody should recognize, and everybody should come, and everybody should be in the state of Geul. That's a next stage. But what's the stage right now? The Rebbe says, Izgalus happened. What kind of Izgalus? Izgalus is that there was an Izgalus to Mashiach Ba'atzma. Now, how do we know and where do we see this a little better? So what I would like to share with you is a piece from the Kingship, this week's book. This is what we were holding last week in the discussion. I elaborated a little bit more today, but here's a sikha. Everybody should learn the entire sikha. The sikha is in Chelik Lamed. The sikha is in Chelik Lamed. The third sikha in Parshas Chayei Sarah. In this week's Haftarah, Parshas Chayei Sarah, there's a phenomenal story. The story is, since the parsha talks about Avram Avinu's passing and Sarah's passing, but they call Avram, and how Yitzchak becomes the heir to Avram Avinu. And it says in the parsha how Avram Avinu kicks out everybody else who might think they're the heir, and yet Yitzchak is the one, he's the Yoresh, he becomes the next in line to take over the kingdom, so to speak, the kingdom of Avram. So based on that, we have the same story of another king, David HaMelech, reaching the end of his life, and he's also questioning of how he's transitioning his malchus to the next generation. And over there's a story that someone one of his children decided that they're king. Adoniyahu thought he will be melech, and he had a whole following, and they all proclaimed him king. And Shlomo they didn't invite, and so on and so on. It was a power grab. He was self-appointed himself as man, and he had quite a following, impressive people. But the Navi goes on to say how Bathsheba, who is Shlomo Melech's mother, comes running to the Navi, whatever, and she cries, whatever, and he says, "Let's go, we'll go together." And they go to the Melech, and he tells her how she should come in and tell the king, "You swore that Shlomo will be the Melech," and so on and so forth. When the king hears that, that's I think the most of the Haftarah that we read this week. And then the further part of the story is that David HaMelech gives her a promise that Shlomo will be Melech and no one else. And then she ends with the words Yechia Melech David, that the King David should live. And does it say L'olam? Yechia Melech David L'olam, maybe? I don't know what it says. Yechia Melech David, that's a conclusion. But if you what? It could be it says L'olam. And then the continuation of it, which we don't read, the Rebbe brings in the Ha'aris that there are some nusachs that read the continuation as well. But nusach, our nusach, we stop over there. But the next phrase is that the king commands that there should be a form of coronation for Shlomo HaMelech that should counter the coronation of Adoniyahu. In other words, in order that there shouldn't even be a possible thought that Chas v'Shalom Adoniyahu is going to be the next king, the king arranges a coronation and an anointing. They go and they anoint David Shlomo HaMelech. It's not such a big party, but it's a party. They have him ride on, the king says, have him ride on my Preda. Preda was like the royal horse. Preda is a young, what is it? Exactly a Preda type of yeah, it could be. I would think it's a stallion. But Preda usually I think is more like a donkey, between a donkey and a mule, whatever. But there was a royal mule, which anybody that's not the king would be in violation, would be a mighty malchus. Even the prince can't use that. It's the king's private. It's Air Force One, so to speak. And then, see, we came a little while from a Peret to Air Force One. But I guarantee you, David HaMelech's Peret is going to sach mehr wert with the ganze Air Force One. In any case, you can't use it if you're not that position. And the king makes sure to be done, and they anoint Shlomo, and they cry out before Shlomo, Yechi HaMelech Shlomo. That's the story. And now David HaMelech is still alive. And then when Adonai hears about it, he gets terrified. He runs to the Mizbeach to hold on that he shouldn't be able to kill him. And in the end, Shlomo HaMelech doesn't kill him because he was a morid b'malchus. In other words, when he saw that this is what happened, and that with the king's permission, his whole plan was thwarted, he got terrified. That's the story. Okay, it says. Yeah. So now, the Rebbe asks in the question over here, what's the content? What's the halachic idea? What's the inner idea that you're going and you're anointing Shlomo HaMelech as a king, and David HaMelech is still alive? We know that there are no two ein shtei melachim mishtamshin bekeser echad. There are no two kings that can be mishtamish with one crown. Now you have a dual kingdom. You can't have two kings. Not shayach to have two malachim. So how can you have a malchus of Shlomo? And you have to say that Shlomo's malchus has a geder of malchus because the people said to him what would be called moirid b'malchus. You can't say Yechi HaMelech only to the melech. If you announce to someone who's not the melech Yechi HaMelech, that's a merida b'malchus. That's called a rebellion against the king. So how is it that they're going and they're announcing to Shlomo HaMelech that long live the king? Because Shlomo HaMelech is malchus, and that's what he was allowed to ride on the king's horse or whatever, because he was king. But how can he become king? Because we find after. Now you might say there were times in history of Jewish kings. I think definitely one of them in Malchus Beis David, but possible also in Malchei Yisrael. There were cases, and the Rebbe brings them. I don't recall them right now who they were. Yehoshaphat and others, who their father, the emperor, was getting old and weak or whatever, and they handed over the Malchus to the next generation b'chayav in their life. And the Rebbe brings that there's such an interesting thing that you can pass on the Yerusha. Yerusha can happen even in a person's lifetime, but not regarding possessions, only regarding appointments. If you are appointed to a certain thing, and let's say you could hand it, it's not that you're giving a gift. Your son, what is it called? An heir is able to actually receive that Yerusha during the lifetime. So we find kings that gave it over. But the Rebbe says in those cases, those kings ceased to be kings. In other words, it was suspended their kingdom and their son became the melech. But the Rebbe says clearly in the case of David that David did not stop being a melech, because you see in Divrei Hayamim, it describes what David did till the day that he passed away. If that's the case, you get to a real problem over here. How can you have two kings ruling at the same time? It even says in the Medrash that the Eibishter said it to David HaMelech. The Eibishter says, you have to die now, because one Malchus cannot touch another Malchus, even Kimaloi Nima. Even, you can't overlap. Two kingdoms can't even overlap. Even a hair's breadth. Even the tiniest, even, you can't have a king overlapping another king even for 3 seconds, 1 second, even the tiniest bit. And that's why, since it arrived the time for Shlomo's Malchus, David had to pass away. Why? Because David was king until the very last day. Even that's the case, how can David and Shlomo be king at the same time? That's the Rebbe Shai. The Eibishter told David, it's time for you to pass. Because it arrived Shlomo's time. So the Rebbe is asking, so we see two kingdoms can't be at the same time. If that's the case, we need to understand what was the context of this period of time. I don't know how long it was. If it was a couple of months, or if it was a year or so, I don't know how long it was, where there was an overlap of David and Shlomo being king. Because Shlomo was already anointed and everything, and they called out before him Yechi HaMelech Shlomo, and yet long live King Shlomo, and yet Shlomo would not be the king. So the Rebbe explains a fascinating thing, And the Rebbe says we have to appreciate and understand that you're right, there's no such a thing as two kings being the two kings at the same time, but that has an exception. In the dynasty of David HaMelech, it's possible. In the dynasty of David HaMelech, it's possible to have, in other words, in all other kingships and in all other appointments of authority, you can't have two authorities at the same time. But David HaMelech's Malchus based David is an exception. Why? Because there is a certain range which is actual monarchy, how would you call it? Actual sovereignty. That means conducting the affairs and decreeing decrees and having everybody running the country cannot be done by two people, because a king has absolute authority. And if you're ever caught in the case that one king said go right and the other king said go left, and the fact that you can't listen absolutely to one because you're contradicting the other will takes away the entire kingdom, because a king has to be absolute. There's no other way. So therefore, no two kingdoms when it comes to actual ruling. The Rebbe says all empires, every single empire besides David HaMelech, the content of the empire is its actual ruling. In other words, when the king is appointed to be a king means he's appointed to be a ruler. And since his appointment to be a king is on the practical level to be a ruler, you can't have two rulers. So taka then you can't have two kings at the same time. He says by David HaMelech, Malchus based David, it's a different story. Kingship goes much deeper than their actual ruling and their actual dominion, than their actual running the country. By Malchus based David, the king is an essentially elevated, exalted human being that is head and shoulders above everybody else. He is higher, he's an exalted being, and he's essentially a king. He's royal to his core, or rather his royalty emanates from who he really is and its essence. Now, that rulership and that kingship comes out and expresses itself in it's activated. How does it come out? When he's sitting on his malchus, and he issues edicts and decrees and makes rules and regulations and runs the country and sends the army out and decrees this will happen and that will happen. That is when he's sitting in the, so to speak, in the Oval Office, and he's stamping and he's putting his stamp on seal on various different what do they call it today? Not proclamations. They have another word. Bills or whatever it is that the king issues forth. That's actuality. That's the external part of it. There's a very deep, essential quality of kingship, and the Rebbe says, he proves it from the Rambam. Only David HaMelech acquired that. The Eibishter only gave that to one being, to David HaMelech. And that's what the Rebbe says. The Rambam says that David HaMelech was Zoiche beKeser Malchus. Keser Malchus means this idea that you essentially have it in your essential DNA and who you are. You're an exalted. When people see you, they sense there is an exaltedness. They sense you're a people above, a cut above the rest, and you have it within you to be a leader, to have a certain powerful. Charisma is not the right word, because charisma could be used in a cheap way, but this is an awesome, incredible, charismatic figure and powerful figure that could rule and has it within him. So the Rebbe says like this: this Inyan goes over automatic, because this is who the king is in his essence. When he passes away and it goes to his children, it's not like he has something. He has a possession. He was given a certain appointment, and now we take that appointment and we give it to his son. Just like he has a car and we give his car to his son. That's not what happens. And because of that, he has certain position. This is his position. He says that's by all other kings. One of the things they have a house, they have a car, they have a this, they have a that. One of the things they have is this guy's a shliach tzibur, he's a chazan. This guy is in charge over the mikveh. He's the mikveh guy. Whenever you have to go to the mikveh, you get the key from him. So if that authority over the mikveh goes to his son, you give it to the son. The Rebbe says by Malchus based David, it's not that. By a regular king, Malchus is not that way. Because the king is a king, he passes that in his DNA to his children, to his descendants. They're born kings. They have royal blood, in other words. They are kings. Now, that does not mean that they will be kings. It just means they're born with the king, with the royal gene in their blood, with this essential, which could come, and the truth is, most of the time it will never come to fruition, and therefore it's as if it doesn't exist for most of them. How do you know? Because it can only be one next generation. If the king has 30 children or whatever, like we had, I had many children, it's only one of them that will be selected. And yet the DNA essentially passes on to all of them. But it is something that goes over to the next generation. But it only is by Malchus Beis David, whose kingship is him. If the kingship is something added to the person, you don't naturally, then you don't, if I learned Baba Kama, I'll give you an example. If I learned Baba Kama, my kid will be born, even though he's taken from my DNA, he's not born with Baba Kama. Why is he not born with Baba Kama? Because Baba Kama was added to me. Baba Kama is not me. But if I have a certain sharpness of mind, my kid might have that same sharpness of mind. Why? Because that's a genetic entity. It's something in who I am that goes over to my children. So the Rebbe says kingship by David HaMelech is essential to who he is. And therefore it will go over to Shlomo HaMelech. It will go over to his children. Now the Rebbe says, therefore, Shlomo HaMelech was born a king, even before this appointment. But that kind of kingship, you can't call him a melech. Why? Because that might never come to fruition. Number one, it might not be Shlomo. David HaMelech has other children. So it might be someone else. Even in the case where the Rebbe says in this sikha, even in the case, I would read it inside, but it's a little late, and I don't want to go into that. So the Rebbe says, even in the case where he's Ben Yachid, let's say he's a Ben Yachid, he's the only kid, there's no one else it can go to. So it has to be him. Yet it's also not. He's not yet a king. Why is he not yet a king? Chas v'shalom. Yeah, but why? Because chas v'shalom he can pass away. Before Shlomo Melech was born, there was a kid that Bathsheba thought would be the Melech. When she initially came to David HaMelech had promised her that her son would be, and they gave birth to a child. And really, possibly that child would have been the heir. But what happened was, because of the sin of David and Bathsheba, that was the curse, and the baby was never died. And David HaMelech was right. And Shlomo HaMelech, and that's when the Nevuah came, that it would be the next, whatever. So Shlomo HaMelech would be the thing. But still, even in that case, even if you have a Nevuah, for instance, it's still not a Melech, because it's not activated yet. That's what David HaMelech said, that you should go and anoint Shlomo. When he anointed Shlomo, that Malchus came it came to revelation. Okay? It was revealed. And now Shlomo HaMelech is a Melech. David is a Melech and Shlomo HaMelech is a Melech. Now, can Shlomo HaMelech already sit on the ruling chair and issue edicts and actually go ahead and pass new bills? That he can't do. Why? Because on that we say, Ein shtei melachim mishtamshim b'keserech. Mishtamshim means to actually use it in terms of the people. The authority over the people, that you can't. In other words, the essential quality of kingship the switch could be turned off or it can be turned on. Once it's turned on, then the person senses that kingship. He feels already that exaltedness. He feels already that elevation in himself, but it's not yet necessarily projected. Because in terms of, but he's already a melech, because he's conscious of his malchus. His malchus fills every fiber of his being. We'll understand that a little better soon when we get to the psychological part of it. But this idea, in terms of halacha, the Rebbe says, happened by Shlomo HaMelech. And since, again, we're dealing with something essential, so therefore two kings can have it, but the Rebbe says it's really not two kingdoms. It's really the same kingship. What does Shlomo HaMelech have? He has David's Keser Malchus. That which makes David the Melech, that gene, if you want to really define what it is, it's a piece of God's royalty. The Eibishter is a melech. And the Eibishter's feeling of, I will be a melech. And when the Eibishter, in Sfiras HaMalchus, when that manifests as God being a king, cholak, what's the lashon over there, when it comes to a melech, what's shecholak mikvoidai? What's the lashon? Shenosan mewat. He gave from his. Now it says that even by Goyish kings, there is a little spark of it, or else they wouldn't have that charisma and that power. There's a certain spark in it. That's where the Alter Rebbe, where they say knew who the Tsar was, and so. But that's a chitzoniistic Tsar, but by a spark. But a Malchus Beis David, it was like a downloaded of the Eibishter's kingship. Now Shlomo HaMelech has it via David. It's not a separate thing. Because David is this, it will go over to Shlomo. Now, most of the time, it's not activated by the son until the father passes away. The Rebbe gives a special reason in the end of the Sikha why Dafka by David and Shlomo was the only time that it had to be shared at the same time, simultaneously by two people, the same Keser Malchus. But when we say it was shared by both of them, it was shared in terms of that they both were kings, one not less than the other. But when it came to actually being able to put the seal, that's already the third level. And the third level means that it's fully activated outward to the people. That doesn't happen till later. And on that, the Eibishter says, David HaMelech, now your time came to end, because Shlomo has to actually be able to not just be a melech for himself, but to be a melech. So we put it in halachic terms. If Shlomo HaMelech would have rode his father's donkey or whatever, mule, before the Mashiach of Shlomo HaMelech would have been a moirid b'malchus. Because you can't call a melech, or anybody that calls you for it, that's not. At the time that he did that, Shlomo HaMelech is now halachically a melech. You can call him melech and so on, because he has it within him. He's not a moirid b'melech, and he has a halacha now. But someone who disobeys him is not yet called a moirid b'malchus. Like you find, why wasn't Adoniyo executed? Adoniyo challenged Shlomo's malchus. Why wasn't he executed? You can answer on one level because he did it before. But why wasn't he executed even after Shlomo HaMelech was already proclaimed? They already were Nimshach Shlomo. Why wasn't he executed? So the answer is because in terms of him to the people, it's not yet revealed. And it's not called the Moirid B'Melchus until it's Mispashit Malchusai. To the Malchus is actually Mispashit. And how is the Malchus Mispashit? When the Melech actually sits al Kisei Mamlachtoi with quill in his hand and he starts ruling and judging the nation. That can only be one Melech. That's the Rebbe's idea. So if we take this concept, and we apply it to what we spoke about, how the Rebbe says that in our days we have already his Galus Mashiach. But there is another element. There is the Hispashtus of Mashiach al Yedei Pu'uloisav, through his Pu'ulas. We can see in this Sikha the Rebbe is defining it in terms of quality. When Moshiach Tzidkenu gets activated, his power of Malchus gets activated in him, he, in the side of just a spiritual thing, he has this power of Nevuah that we said before. In terms of Malchus, in terms of kingship, he is now a full-fledged Melech. He's a king. But it's not yet in a state of hispashtus to the entire world. To further elucidate on this idea in very geschmacka terms, today is the Rebbe Rashab's birthday. So we'll see in the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer, he literally defines these three stages in this Maimer. But go first to the last page, because by mistake when I set up the copies, I put the second, I put the last, this whatever. Go to where it says Reish Yud Beis. It's the last page in the printout. Verses Reish Yud Daled. What? This is Chelik Lamed. Sicha Gimel. Okay. Let's look in the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab explains it from a more, what we might call psychological. The Rebbe is talking more in Gidrei Halacha, and the Rebbe Rashab is talking more about in the inner world of a king. What are these three stages? So he says like this: Kamoi Kain, you see in I underline the lines. Reish Yud Beis. Kamoi Kain Yuvan b'midas hamalucha. We will understand in the midas of Malchus. Sheyesh ba gam ken gimel madreges. There's three levels. Mereishes haschalasa acha ba begiloi mamish. They're befedish. There are three stages from where Malchus begins until it's fully manifest and fully revealed. Three steps. This is in the Hemshech Chasana, Samach to Samach of Reish Nun Zayin. So what are these three stages? Let's continue a little bit from the part that I didn't underline, but just continuation. Ha'echad, which he starts from the most external level. He's working his way from outside in. Okay, because he's working his way from what we see, from the visible to the hidden, to the concealed. So you're going from external to pnimius. He says, when the king's hispashtos goes out over a country, the roimim is gedulasai, his exalted majesty, greatness, the roiv chastoi, and his abundant kindness, the tuva and his goodness, the emasai and his dread and his fear, upachtoi and his dread, mispashtim begilui al kulam. literally expands and spread out across the entire kingdom. The kulam is batlam lefanav, and everybody becomes nullified before him, surrenders to him. They're all, feel privileged to serve him and terrified to disobey him. And he conducts their affairs according to his will. Their internal affairs, their external affairs. He runs them completely because they have this great, complete bittul to the melech. That's kingdom in actuality. Then he goes through a whole long shakla v'tarya, which I'm not going to go over here. That means expressed kingdom. That's what we spoke about earlier, that David HaMelech was king until the day he passed away, and Shlomo HaMelech did not become this until David HaMelech passed away, and Shlomo HaMelech became the actual king over the entire Jewish people. But there is a stage before that. What's the stage before that? Ve'inyanu Moshiach. Let's take a look at Ve'inyanu, and in the where I made the second lines underlined in the bottom of page Reish Yud Gimel on the second Ve'inyanu. No, I'm still on the same page we were doing before, but on the bottom. Yeah. Mishum Ve'inyan Achtara. What happens at the time of the crowning? Mashekibel of Keser Malchus. When he accepted the crown. This would be equivalent to Shlomo HaMelech when David HaMelech sent that they should anoint him. Okay? What happens then? He is now, the king himself is now accepting this role as being a king. He now willfully wants to be a king. This oired is due, and this awakening. Even though it's not yet expressed to the outside, they're not yet flying balloons. They're not yet expressing it. It's not yet being expressed. He might not. He's not yet bringing it down into details to decide how he's going to fix the education system and how he's going to. Someone told me this is L'Kavod Rabbi Lazar Fish. This story. I was sitting. Is he here still? Okay. I was sitting yesterday with a Baba V'chusid. We were learning Tanya, and this Baba V'chusid told me this story, and it was just so beautiful. It shows you vision. People have vision. He says this person came with the Baba Rebbe across the United States from Europe after the war, and they were coming on the boat. Right? The first week he was here, so he knew him back from that. And then the first went out. So then the Baba moved to Crown Heights. And Baba was small, and if you go to Borough Park, you see the Baba Rebbe built up an enormous malchus. Today it's enough to Chedei Chalukah. They split it into two. It's a huge malchus. It's incredible. So he says that the Baba Rebbe called him, said, "Let's go to the mikveh together." In Crown Heights, they went together. As they were walking, the Baba Rebbe starts enumerating to him a plan. He says, "Ich will nehmen. I'm going to start." This is after the Holocaust. Everybody's broken and everything. He says, "Ich will machen. I'm going to make a little kindergarten, and there'll be a little first for little Yingelach, then I'll make one for little Meidelach." And he starts explaining how we'll make, and then we'll make a elementary school, and then we'll make a high school, and then we'll make this, and then we'll marry off the people, and then we'll make a koilo, and then we'll make a this, and we'll make a that, and he goes on, and then we'll build a big shul, and he's saying you can't go on. Then they come to the mikveh. And the Baba doesn't have money to pay for the mikveh. So he asked him, "Do you have a quarter that you can loan me that I'm getting in the mikveh?" So he said he was like so blown away that he's just now telling him he doesn't have a quarter for a mikveh, going to pay the meter. And but he's confident. He knows he's going to do it. And he charted his way. And exactly what he said he's going to do, he did. He built up an enormous thing. Why? I will tell you what. He's a tzanzer einikel. He has in him a certain royal blood. He comes from tzaddikim, and because he's that gives him. If you saw the Shlomo Baba there, you saw that he was a malchustic person. He had an enormous expression of kingship and of royalty. He was a very, very regal human being. So you have it. When you have it in essence, then you can dream this, and then it comes to expression. By him, it was already in a state of not just potential. There are other tzanzer einiklach and other people that have it, but it never activated. What's the idea of a schus avos? You have certain genes, you have certain inyanim. So what he's saying over here is that even before this hachtara, the melech has be'etzem nafshay. He has a malchus, but that's not activated. When you do the hachtara, that's when the will arises in the king, even though he doesn't say it to anybody, maybe only to one guy who's walking with him to the mikveh. Other than that, he doesn't reveal it to anybody, what he's planning to do. It's still very quiet. But yet he knows within himself that he's going to be a melech. And he's planning to do it. From there it will come. When it will be revealed. He's going to reveal it all. In other words, it will eventually come, but now he decided already he will do it. Since he was already inspired with a general desire to be a king. Therefore, as soon as he was crowned, he was awakened with a general desire. Now he's already a king. He's already a ruler, even though he's not putting quill to paper, and it's quiet. Now we go back a page. It was already revealed in his soul. It's just a matter of time before it's going to come down onto the quill, onto the paper, onto the edict, until you'll start seeing buildings built in his name, bridges built in his name, wars being fought in his name. It will all happen. But it's already there now. It has already been decided. Now, and he brings a proof. I didn't circle, I didn't ring. He brings an interesting story from Shaul HaMelech. The Eibishter told Shmuel HaNavi, the Yidden complained they wanted a Melech. The Eibishter told Shmuel HaNavi to go select, and he went and he goes, puts all the Shvatim go past him, and it turns out that Shevet Binyamin will be the one that they put back all the families, and they find the family of Shaul HaMelech, and then it's Shaul. Shaul is selected. They go, they do an anointing, and Shaul HaMelech is anointed. Shmuel HaNavi is there. At that moment, two things break out. There were believers, Hasidim of Shaul HaMelech, subjects, excited. And then there were scoffers. It says Befedish. There were those who laughed, and they joked about it, and they laughed it off, and then, whatever, fine. It says Shaul HaMelech, after the anointment, he didn't move into no palace. He went back to Givat Shaul. It says Befedish in the pasuk. He went back to do what? To mow the lawn. He went back to be a lawn. Not to mow. He went back to be, because he was working the fields. It says, and one day it says he has some people that went along, kind of, they were already looking at the king. They were there, but they were, it calls them charedim l'dvar Hashem or something like that, that they joined Shaul. I didn't check it up this week. I looked at it last week. I forgot the exact words, that they were kind of the ones who went with Shaul, but Shaul went back to regular business. Something was sparked in him, but it was totally private. It wasn't to the outside. Then what happened? What happened next? Suddenly the king Nachash, sometimes it takes a snake to evoke something. So a fellow by the name of Nachash, who was the king of Melech Ammon, I think, Ammon, who came and attacked, and they messed with Jews in a place. And Shaul comes home with his bakar, from the plowing fields, and he hears this happen. The pasuk says, "Vayichar apoy ma'od." He became enraged. Now, there were many, many events that happened and attacks that happened all his life, and Shaul was not enraged. Why did Shaul suddenly get provoked to be enraged at the chutzpah that he came and he did that? Why? Because deep inside him, he already decided that he's melech. And they messed with his people. Even though they don't know he's his people, but he knows they're his people. And therefore, you mess with them, you're messing with him. It's his responsibility. He's responsible for the people, and he's enraged. And what does he do next? Next, he goes and he takes an ox. He splits it into 12 parts. He cuts it into 12 parts. He sends it out to all the tribes, and he says, anybody who doesn't subscribe to the military right now, anybody who doesn't enlist to the army, so is going to be done to all of their cattle. So he starts ruling with an iron fist. The first thing is, get over here, you're going out to war. And everybody. So what happened? What changed? So the Rebbe says, the Rebbe Rashab, at the time when he was anointed, he already became a king. But it wasn't kingship in actuality. But it's so close. All it needs is a provocation. All it needs is a spark to set that thing as a blaze, and it will go in. And that's what he says later. Look at. I also underline this. Miyad shenichtar bekeser malchus nikra melech. He's already a king. Ma'achrei shekvar nimshach midas hamalchus. The midas hamalchus is already drawn. You know what he even says? I'll tell you even more. He says earlier that it's even possible that at the time of the anointment, he doesn't even have an esoidus. He doesn't even have any awareness, but it's a subconscious movement that happens from his essence into action. In other words, a switch is turned on from the subconscious in the subconscious from off to on, even if it's not active. And then later things will stir, but you know it will happen because it's been the lion has been allowed out of the cage. That's the point. It's been released. It's going to come out. This is the idea. And he says, but this is very important words. Before they appoint him, before it becomes revealed in him, even though he has it, he has in his essence, just like a person who has the immense capacity to be an amazing Baal Tzedakah is not called a Baal Tzedakah until he actually starts, at least is moved in a state that he's going to give Tzedakah, as opposed to someone who has the potential for it. So, as long as it's an etzam hanefesh, it's not shayach l'dei gilui to a revelation. This is the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer. Okay. Why does this bring us back to what the Rebbe is saying over here? Back to the Mashiach. There's 3 levels in Mashiach. Mashiach A, level Mashiach A is Mashiach standby. There always has to be someone who's a descendant of Malchus Beis David, who has that Keser Malchus inside of him, who's waiting for the tzav, for the Eibishter to flick that flick on. And especially according to Chassidus, it means higher levels of his neshama will be activated. His Koiches Achai Yechida, especially by Mashiach, it has to be activated. Then there is the activation, but it's only to himself. And that's after the Eibishter already sets him on the path. He has to have received the divine communication. He definitely has to have received an incredible infusion of confidence and energy and godly inspiration that is utterly, incomprehensible. Mashiach Tzidkenu, and yet it's not in a state of actuality until the Eibishter gives Mashiach the actual go-ahead to actually actualize in Ayidei Puloisav. And which Puloisav is the Rebbe saying? The Puloisav, Yilcham L'chanas Hashem, V'yinatzeach, and so on and so forth. What comes out of here is just to finalize, this is a very interesting thing. There's 2 ways of identifying Mashiach. One is from the inside out, and the other one is from the outside in. When the Rambam gives you a list of the qualifications of what decides if someone is Mashiach, how is someone Mashiach? The Rambam's checklist is not for Mashiach. The Rambam's checklist is for a bystander. Someone who's a Jew living at any time starts hearing that there is somebody that is whatever, and he starts noticing this individual. And he sees that this individual does this, and he does that, and he does that. So because the person doesn't know God, the person doesn't know Nevuah. No one sees the Eibishter talking to him. No one knows what's going on inside that person's neshama, that there's the deepest revelation of higher levels of, that's not known to him. So you're an observer from the side. If you're an observer from the side, you need evidence. What's the evidence? So the evidence is someone who is Yaakov Kol Yisrael, he's doing these things, and then finally you get, and then you have Cheskas Mashiach. And then you have the Vadei Mashiach. And it's possible that a Becheskas Mashiach won't necessarily be a Vadei Mashiach. That's all for the person who's looking on the side. But for Mashiach Tzidkenu himself, for instance, he, Adarab, starts from a complete different place. He starts from Mashiach being activated in his inner soul. That's like Machshava, that's his inner thought. And he knows about it. Then maybe he starts speaking about it and starts revealing it. And then it comes into action. And he does all the pa'ulas that he needs to do. So to Mashiach Tzidkenu, once he has that already state that Shlach Nabi Tishlach, the Eibishter sent him, Once he's been already activated, is it possible, chas v'shalom, that something happens and it's not? If the Eibishter sent him already to be the actual goyel, is it possible in the end that you can still have what the Rambam describes, a Moshiach that gets aborted in the middle? Then the Eibishter would not send Moshiach to give him an active wake up and a turn on his nefesh and a shlichus to do and a communication and downloading in Nishmas Mashiach unless it's a vadai. There's no breakdown in the system. The breakdown is only from the observer on the outside who doesn't know. So that person has these challenges. But the Mashiach b'yatzmai, the communication and the evolving and the revelation of Mashiach happens on a complete different level. This sort of explains a little bit what the Rebbe is talking about. The Isgalus of Mashiach happened already, but now it needs to be the Isgalus al Yedei Pulos. I had a lot to talk about the Rebbe Rashab and his major sikha that he spoke about when he said Kol hayotzei l'melchemes beis David. But I have to go, so we're going to have to leave it over here. And the Chvabrengen should continue, but I have a l'chaim, and then I have an important meeting to establish a mikveh in this community. A lot of good things. So, and then I have an early morning flight. So I'm a what? Oh, what I'm saying is what? I'm going tomorrow morning. I'm going first to Cincinnati, and then I'm till Thursday. And then I will share one nakuda that I wanted to say. In Chassidus, we find an amazing, interesting thing. We find that when you speak about Sfiras HaMalchus, what is Sfiras HaMalchus benefesh? So in Chassidus, you have it. Sometimes it speaks about Hagabah v'hisnasos. You're a leader. You're a communicator. Many places it speaks about Sfiras HaMalchus as what? Bittul to the Melech. The bittul to the Melech. So Sfiras HaMalchus has two sides. Our Sfiras HaMalchus is what? Our bittul. The Melech Sfiras HaMalchus is what? His royalty, his pashtas. So there's two sides to the Inyan. In other words, what is Sfiras HaMalchus benaf sheinu in our nefashis is our idea to be the subjects and to be the army. Now, based on what we said earlier, that mitzad the mashpia, mitzad the melech, his malchus is an atzmiyas thing. It's not an external thing that's slapped onto him. It's in his essence. The question is only the level of hidden and concealment. And once it was let out of the box, even if it goes into concealment, it will eventually re-reveal itself. It has to. Because once it's been activated, it has to come with a poil mamish. Even if there might be like Shaul HaMelech, his malchus was activated by the Moshiach. Then what happened? He went back and he's mowing the lawns. When you see him doing that, there's no visibility of any malchus over there. And then suddenly it's reignited because it has to reignite. I believe that the same is also by the makabla, not just I believe. That so it will be by the makabla, by the recipients. And why am I saying it? What we are seeing now is this incredible resurgence in Lubavitch to Mashiach consciousness and to the awareness that the Rebbe might have been saying something that we're not been paying attention. In Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, everybody was there. Suddenly, because of the trauma of Gimel Talmuz, it kind of went like, and now it's an amazing thing how it's like beginning. You're seeing it. People are learning much more and becoming more inspired. And it's spreading. It's really Why? It has to spread. Because we're dealing with an atzmiyastic thing that the Rebbe is going to get the exact place we were standing in Nun Aleph and Nun Beis. We're coming exactly back to that. I have no suffix. We have to go through some. We went into the freezer and the malchus was frozen a little bit. It went and we can look at the Rebbe as a tzaddik and someone who was an inspiration and left us a nice legacy to spread Yiddishkeit and what a good thing. But that was a chitzonius de Lubavitch, and it's going to resurge. It's going to and it is. It's happening. You see, just in the last 6 months, Atut Alt campaign, everybody's talking. The theme of the Kinnis this year is all the vision, the Rebbe Sich of Nun Beis that everybody was so afraid to touch all these years, suddenly is being re-embraced and studied. It has to happen because it's an atzmiyas to get emes that has to come out. And I felt it by myself. In my own journey, it was kind of like numbed out for a while. But all that happens is it gets numbed out and covered. It doesn't get. It's been put into us. It's what we know from our mother's milk. It's in our DNA. It's Andish is nicht meglach. It's not even a possibility. And it's important to know this. It's important to recognize this, because ultimately this is our goal and our mission. As much as we try to famfai her and famfai in, there's a malchus that is waiting to be implemented. And this is what the Rebbe Rashab, when he established his yeshiva, he said after 3 years, he says, now we passed the first 3 years of Arla. Now I'm going to tell you what it's really all about. It's amazing. This was in 1800. In 3 years before that, no, in Tafrei Shamach Aleph, which was 1800, because it was still Simchas Torah. In 1900, I mean. In 1900, the Rebbe Rashab is sitting Simchas Torah, and he's giving a ganze sikha, where he's explaining, and he says, now that Yeshiva's Tamchas Tmim has been here 3 years, so it's past already 3 years of Arla. So now I want to make a krisus bris. He wants to make a covenant. And what's the covenant? That he wants that and he's making it asher yeshnoi poi v'asher enenu poi. It's almost like Moshe Rabbeinu speaking. He's making a covenant with all of Tamchet Tmimim, with all of his guys. And what is he demanding? He's demanding mesiras, not mesiras haratzon, hanochas atzmusai. He's demanding something that a king demands. What's hanochas atzmusai? Hanochas atzmusai is explained in Chassidus, means you're giving your entire existence over to the king. It's what happens by achtaras hamalchus. He says, I'm demanding that from everybody in Tamchet Tmimim. And he says, why? Because because kol hayotzei l'milchemes beis David, where whoever goes out to fight the battles of David. And he says, what does it mean, Milchemes beis David? It means bias Moshiach tzedkeinu. That's David. It's not talking about David back then. It's talking about now. And you need chayolim, and that's the yeshiva. The yeshiva is the chayolei beis David. These are the armies of David. What does it mean that he waited 3 years? Because it's possible to say, if anybody learns, you learn Ken to the Seitz Chaim, and you look at the days, you look a little bit in the history of the Lubavitcher Bochrim, the first Tmimim. You read about them. I highly recommend. They were only published in Hebrew, not in English. There are 4 volumes of Svarim called Oitzer HaChasidim, I think it's called. I think they have it here, in which they speak about all the mashpiyim, all the personalities, mashpiyim and great men in Lubavitch. One of them is from Russia, one is from America, one is from other cities, and one is from Eretz Yisrael. Mashpiyim, and it's like you read about these people. It's one thing to read stories about a Rebbe. It's another thing to read stories about Chassidim and to see what kind of incredible human beings they were, like lions. And the Rebbe Rashab created these. He demanded it. It's possible to think that, there's Chassidus, there's the Baal Shem Tov. It's a way of serving God. It's inspiration. You got to be a good Jew, and so on and so forth. So he makes a yeshiva. The yeshiva will help facilitate. Oivdei Avaya. It'll create, 100 Rabbi Reichik Olav Shaloms, Chassidim, Yidden, Oivdim. That's what the Rebbe Rashab is establishing. He's establishing an elevated thing. So the Rebbe says that's Arla, meaning that's looking the Chitzonius. It's something. Now that the Arla is passing, you peeling away the outside, I would like you to realize what's the pneumius of what I'm setting up. I'm setting up an organization now. And he says that before Mashiach comes, there's going to be a fight, a massive battle. And Tamchet Tmimim is not for the time they're learning in yeshiva. In Tamchet Tmimim, these people will become warriors. And they'll be warriors their entire life. And they have to fight the battles of Malchus Beis David. And that's going to be in 2 generations, he goes on to explain. Those who will want to deny God completely, those are the Chevra Maskilim. And then there are the Zionists who don't believe in Moshiach. They think that they're going to save the Jewish people with their own power. And that's what we have to fight. And these are the battles of Milchemes Beis David. And whoever is enlisting in Yeshiva's Tamchet Tmimim, know that you're going into a krisis bris mitn Rebbe, manachas atzmusing. You have to be willing to give it all you've got. You don't hold back anything. Strong, firm. It's a powerful words. Why is the Rebbe Rashab saying that? What is he saying? And in another sikh, he doesn't say it there. He says, he connects it to himself, because he says in another sikh, Mir zenen doch von Malchus Beis David, in auf uns is gesagt, and auf uns, we're from the kingdom of David, and auf uns is gesagt geworden, shlo yichpe neira li'olam vad ad Mashiach. That it will never, their flames will not be extinguished forever, including Mashiach. Ad va'ad b'chlal. So he's saying that this is what we're talking about. So I need a Mashiach army. So if you think about it just a little bit, Chassidus was always organized. If Chassidus wouldn't have been organized, it would have been a major flop. In Hayoim Yoim it describes how the Alter Rebbe was incredible Mesuder, and he demanded Seder, and he set up all kinds of Sedarim and Lubavitch and so on and so forth. Now, really, if you think about it, okay, the Baal Shem Tov was the beginning of it all. The Maggid was very organized in the fact that the Maggid, you see, things evolved. The Maggid created the leadership of Chassidus. He created the Rebbes. He wasn't so involved in creating Chassidim. The Maggid was a generation to create the Rabbeim of the Chassidic movement. Okay, then the Maggid had that. The Alter Rebbe is the third generation. He's already taking Chassidus to the masses in terms of. So there was great organization to it, but the avodah in the days of the Alter Rebbe was more personal avodah. It was how to be a yid, how to be a chassid, and so on and so forth. Of course, the Rabbeim were involved in tzedakah of Eretz Yisrael and supporting many things, but the Rebbe Rashab, the concept of hafatzas haTorah. That's what the whole sikh of Chayal Beis David is, that all the people that are coming out, that the Bachrim, they are going to have to be oisik in hafatzas haTorah and his oidus of tshuva across the Jewish world. In other words, he's turning Lubavitch inside. The Rebbe Rashab, even though you think the Rebbe Rashab was so inward, because he made Chassid Bachrim David and learned, it wasn't Miftzayim, if you so to speak, yet he's the one who turned Lubavitch into a major communal work, into a network. He starts it. Why? Because we're dealing with Yamid Melech Beis David, and he's Machzer Malchus Beis David Lemamshala Harishayna. It started. So he said, "No, Malchus Beis David," and now we need to set up an army. He brings organization of army to a much greater degree than any other Rabbeim before him, because he sets up a yeshiva. Until then, there wasn't a yeshiva. He sets up the first a yeshiva, and he calls them soldiers, and not stam soldiers, the soldiers of Beis David. These are huge things. So as the generations go, things were more vague. In the beginning, it's more vague and vague and vague, because even in the Rebbe Rashab's days, they didn't talk about the avodah was not chizuk of in Moshiach, Hamunah Mashiach. The avodah mainly was hafatzas hachasidus, hafatzas haTorah. That's what the Rebbe Rashab shluchim were doing. It took 2 generations. At the end of the Friedige Rebbe, the Friedige Rebbe starts talking about la'alta l'geula, la'alta l'tshuva. And it starts to be on Imam and B'biyas HaMashiach, starts becoming forefront, and Lubavitch has become very identified with the belief in Mashiach and the people who are like into Mashiach, so forth. So it started with because the Rebbe Rashab says it already in the beginning of the Sikha, but in Poyal Mamish, you don't really see it till a generation later. And then obviously the Rebbe takes it with Basi Legani and his entire leadership, and takes this Malchus and this kingship further and further and further, until the Rebbe drops us off at the final stop at Tafshin and Aleph and Beis. He tells us like mind-blowing sikhs of where we're at, and he says, come back when you're ready. And here we are 30 years later, and we're beginning to realize that you can't ignore. It's not going away. What was said, and he's waiting. And Baruch Hashem, there's an Esaidus, and now what we need to do is just build on that Esaidus and Esaidus. I only daven and I only pray that it should be enough, the the fact that there was such an enormous Esaidus this year, all in Yonam of Mashiach, it should be considered, even if maybe not everybody's in agreement and not everybody speaks like I speak and saying things like this, but you know what? There is an Esaidus. There is an awakening. People are far more makablim, and the whole world. I'm saying, but the Rebbe was wanting it from his chassidim in a special way, and that's interesting. Someone shared with me, Rebbe Lazer Gorko shared with me today from Reb Chaim Kanievsky, that he was asked, what's the fastest thing to bring the Geula? What's the thing? He says Limud HaTorah, and he says specifically learning Torah in the matters of Mashiach, which means learn the Avodah. What the Rebbe said 30 years ago is the Derech HaYeshara VaYechida. From Reb Chaim Kanievsky as well. Everybody, you see, the Rebbe is in Yonim it's going to make its way. How the Rebbe reaches the Litvisher world, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says it. But eventually, what the directives and the teachings and those powerful things that were said then were not chas v'sholem, a fluff, not a fluff, but a puff of excitement that chas v'sholem withered and disappeared. Our Rebbe is emes la'ad v'netzach netzachim, to the very last word he uttered from his mouth. And therefore, every word in Likutei Sichos and every word in Sefer HaSichos to Chav Zayin Adar Beis will be fulfilled exactly as it was said. And the Rebbe's, when did the Rebbe give out the Kuntres Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel? Where did it on Chav Cheshvan the Kuntres? What then was it? Was printed for that?
It was released.
Oh, it was released then. Okay, I'm sorry. So it wasn't he gave it out, but it was printed for. And what's the Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel? It's a wild stuff. Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel is saying that the Makam HaMikdash with the Beis Hamikdash is going to come down is in 770. Go explain that. Go explain that to anyone. What the Rebbe is saying over here. Go read the Sikh and with her artists, with a whole build up, and the Rebbe puts it out. It's going to happen in 770 Eastern Park. That's where it's going to happen. Ground zero. Nun Beis? That's what he handed out. Memches. Yeah. That's a hagdama because these stuff was gonna cause such.
That was the first one.
Yeah, Chaim.
That started the whole.
Okay, everyone, l'chaim lebracha. The main thing is remember the Buddha should have.